Hi, this is Jack Stanley, and I wanted to talk about the assassination of James A. Garfield. Perhaps one of the most bizarre, frightening moments in the history of the American presidency, because his death was something that need not have happened. James A. Garfield was an amazingly brilliant, ambidextrous, um, somewhat almost genius like individual, well read, came from extremely poor circumstances. He started at a university, started as the janitor, and worked up his way to professor, and did higher things there as well. And then he went into Congress, and he also was involved in an awful lot of military stuff during the American Civil War. And finally, in 1880, he was the kind of dark horse that was nominated for president in the Republican ticket. He was fighting against the stalwarts, Roscoe Conklin from New York City, who was kind of like in charge and running everything. And he was a powerful boss. And he had Chester A. Arthur, he had a whole bunch of people under his control, under his thumb, including Ulysses S. Grant. And Grant was working really hard trying to get the nomination with the aid of our friend Conklin, but lo and behold, James A. Garfield got it, and James A. Garfield won the election. He served for a very short time, actually. Started March 4th. July 2nd, he was shot at the train station in Washington, D.C. by an absolute madman by the name of Charles Guiteau. Garfield walked into the train station with James Blaine, and Guiteau, interestingly enough, he had gone and purchased a new gun so it would look nice in a display case. He dressed in his finest. He wrote letters explaining the whole situation so he could be honored after it was done. And he met a Garfield at the train station, not a Garfield's wanting, and shot him twice. Robert Lincoln was just entering shortly after this. Interesting thing, after a while, he was on his way to Buffalo, New York, to meet McKinley when he got shot too, and then he decided he was going to stop any of these things in meeting presidents. But after the shooting, Garfield, kind of stunned, vomited and fell. And that was probably the most drastic part of his wounds, vomiting and having a flesh wound that kind of went through and worked itself into a muscle. Now, if wiser minds prevailed, Garfield should have been helped to his feet or put onto a stretcher, taken to the White House, and left alone. The one thing he didn't need to do was to see a doctor. But the doctors were there. And the doctors that were with him were a crack team. But they didn't believe in one thing that they thought was ridiculous. They said it was a fad. What was that? Something called sterilization. That fad, boiling the instruments and then their safety is, oh, come on. That's not going to work. Well, nonetheless, they just put dirty fingers, dirty instruments into the wound. And what had been initially a very simple wound that hit nothing was turned into a festering sore. And he got weaker and weaker, And after about 2 months and a few days, the doctors finished the assassination of James A. Garfield. You know, it's an interesting thing. Guiteau was as crazy as a jaybird. But he said to his jailers, I didn't kill him. The doctors did. He couldn't have been more correct than anyone. I mean, he was amazingly correct. But they killed him anyway because he tried to kill the president. The people that were successful in killing the president just presented a bill for their work, which wasn't paid, at least a good deal of it. And that fad called sterilization basically slapped every one of those doctors in the face. And they had to come to the understanding that sterilization was the way we were going to go. And James A. Garfield became the sacrificial lamb in the field of sterilization. What a brilliant man. I mean, he could write with Latin in his left, Greek with his right, and have a conversation with you while he was doing it. I mean, it's a great parlor trick, but I'll tell you something, try it. You can't do it. I mean, I can try writing with my left hand. It looks like I've had 5 martinis. I can't write. I don't have the control. He had control of both and an amazing intellect. And I really do believe that he would have become one of the strong presidents in a whole field of rather weak ones. The indignity didn't stop with his death. Like Lincoln, he was embalmed to be shown around the country as he was brought back. Unfortunately, he was embalmed totally incorrectly, and his body started to rot immediately. Therefore, they had to close the casket and then put a protective covering around it, a case over the casket, to kind of hide the dreadful smells that were coming from it. No matter what he did, he kind of suffered in this whole story. It's a pity. He's a young man. He was 49 years old. You know, he was 3 years older than John F. Kennedy when he was assassinated. That's very young. And I can put it this way, that eventually he was brought back to Ohio. And he lies in state in the tomb that was created for him, in the protective coating around his casket, which doesn't matter much anymore, but we'll just leave it that way. It's got a flag over it. And next to him is his wife, who is also basically laid out there as well, in state. It's the only case of our presidents in which the casket basically is not entombed or buried. They rest above the ground and in view of everyone. The interesting thing about James A. Garfield, if we look at it this way, he was the sacrificial lamb in the field of sterilization. Louis Pasteur was pushing for this. Doctors thought it was a fad. And it took the killing of a president to finally come to the understanding that sterilization was one of the most important parts of any medical procedure. I'm sorry, James A. Garfield. I'm sorry you had to suffer through all this. Over ignorance, and of course the ugly sister of ignorance is arrogance. And the doctors who were in charge of the poor president suffered from both of these afflictions.